Now that we've set up the database, the next step is to add the tables. Before we can add the tables, we want to make sure that we have the details. And it turns out we did the details for this database in an earlier activity. And so I've made a copy of that earlier detail sheet so that I can use it to manipulate it. So now I've made a copy and I'm going to make changes to this. And the first thing that we need to make sure before we start is that our tables are in order. And what it means by in order is before you can refer to a table, it has to be created. And the times that we're going to be referring to a table is when we're working with foreign keys. So if I look at the first table, which is user, it doesn't have any foreign keys. So nothing has to come before it, so that's fine. The next table is phone number, and it does have a foreign key, and that is user ID, and that refers to the user ID primary key in the user table. And so that user table needs to exist before phone number, and those are in the right order, so that's okay. The next one is registration, and it has two foreign keys, one user ID, and the user table is there, which is fine, that's in order. The second one is section number, and section number isn't before that. We look like here, it's after. So this is a case where I need to take that section table and I need to move it up. And so I'm going to move it up before registration. And there, now I've got section ahead of registration, and that will make it so that registration will work, because both the section number and user ID are in previous tables. So those foreign keys will work. Now let's check out section. Section has a foreign key for instructor, and that's going to be related to the user table, which is already in order. And the second foreign key is in course, and that one isn't yet there. And so this is one that, again, that I need to move course before section. So let's take course and move it up before section. So that it's there and available when section needs to use that course ID. So now we've got both the user table and the course table being started before section. Registration, we've got both the user and the section table before then. And the last table is prerequisite, and it has a course ID, and that's in course, which is previously done, and prerequisite course ID, which is also a course and previously done. So now we have those in order. That's the first step in getting ready to add the tables, is making sure that they're in order. The next step is that we want to use the database. Remember that when we initially set up the database, we were using master. And so we have all of this in there with using master. The next one we want to do is we want to actually use this new database that we created. So the next command is to use student U. And see, now it shows up, which is awesome. That means it's ready to be used. And we just execute that. And it works. And now we're ready. Whatever commands we do now, it will be working on student U. This works, so I'm going to copy it and paste it in my text file, because that's the next command that I want to work. Now, the next step is to actually do the create tables. And we're going to use the create table command, and then we'll list all the columns and details and add constraints. So let's go ahead with the first one, which is create table, and its user was the name of the table. And now there are several details we have to add, and we're going to do these inside parentheses. And we're going to do each column. So the first column is user ID, and that column was a char, and you can just keep going back and looking, right? Because we have it already set up. So we can just go ahead and look. User ID, it's a char 9, and it's a primary key. That primary key is a constraint that we will add. I'm going to add it at the end. So there's the char 9. Now notice that we didn't have it set with null or not null. So when it's blank, that means it's not null, and we want to go ahead and add that here. We don't get to leave it off, even though we could when we were doing our table. We want to be sure and add it. The next one is first name. And it is an N varchar. And we made it big enough for 35. And again, this one is not null. And we just keep adding all these details. I'm going to go ahead and add a few. So now I've listed all of the columns with their data types and whether they're allowed to be null or not null. And I got all of that information directly from the details that were written up in the physical database design. Now I have one problem going on here, and that is that I've got a curly red underline. This is showing me an error, and it says that it's a syntax error. And this one is, everything looks fine, but the problem is actually that user is a keyword. So here we run into the first conflict that we're going to have between our physical database and the actual implementation. If you go and look at the keywords in SQL Server, it's quite a long list of keywords, and you can go find, it keeps going back to this and everything looks fine as far as syntax, but there's that user as a keyword. So when I get here, I'm trying to use that as a name when it's actually a SQL Server keyword. So I'm simply going to append a 1 on there and have that get rid of that problem of it being a keyword. All right, so everything is there as far as the data types and null or not null. Now I can add any default values or identities. So if I go back here and I look in this user table, I don't excuse me, I don't have any identities, but I do have a default value for the user type. So on user type, I can finish here by going default, and the default was simply a capital S. And so that's the default value. So there I've done the first part of the adding the column details. Even though we're done with adding column details, we are not done with creating the table. There are still constraints to be added.